and Commerce Council's Green Chemistry Innovation Webinar Series. Today, Julie Manley and a number of distinguished colleagues will be presenting. And the topic today is the ACS, American Chemical Society Green Chemistry Institute's Pharmaceutical Roundtable Research Grant Program. I'm Monica Becker. I'm the Deputy Director of the GC3, and I'll be moderating the webinar today. And for those of you who are new to the Green Chemistry and Commerce Council, the GC3 is a cross-sectoral business-to-business network of more than 80 companies and other organizations formed in 2005 with a mission to promote green chemistry and engineering in industry. Our member companies span 13 major product sectors and the entire value chain, from chemical manufacturing to retail. Our members bring their leading-edge know-how and dedication to advancing green chemistry to collaborative GC3 projects and to our annual spring roundtable meeting and webinars like this. This is the fourth webinar in our GC3 Green Chemistry Innovation Webinar Series. And in this series, we're examining a variety of models and programs that are being used or can be used to advance green chemistry research, development, and commercial adoption. In our first webinar, we heard from Professor Kai-Chang Lee of Oregon State University, who has an impressive track record of commercializing green chemistry technologies in partnership with industry. And if you haven't heard of Dr. Lee, he is the inventor of an adhesive that is used in Columbia Forest Products bio-based formaldehyde-free Pure Bond plywood. In our second webinar, we had Rui Resendez, the Executive Director of Green Center Canada, who presented on their unique and successful business model for pulling green chemistry ideas out of research labs and into commercial application. Alf Bingham of Innocentive, which is a global leader of open innovation and crowdsourcing innovation, was our third webinar speaker, and he gave a fascinating presentation on Innocentive's highly successful web-based platform for using crowdsourcing to solve technical R&D challenges in industry, government, and nonprofits, including specific examples of green chemistry challenges. So if you haven't had the opportunity to be on those webinars, the past webinars, they are available by audio archive on the GC3 website. If you're not a GC3 member and would like access to those, let us know and we'll help you with that. That gives you a little bit of background on this GC3 Green Chemistry Innovation Webinar Series. So Julie, if you could advance to the next slide. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We have the webinar participants on mute, just to cut down on background noise. And for the participants, not the presenters, if you wish to ask a question, please type your question in the Q&A box, which is located in the drop-down control panel at the top of the screen. If you put your cursor at the top of the screen, you'll see a little arrow all the way to the right, and you can click on Q&A. That opens up a little window and you can put your question in there. We're going to have the presenters present entirely and then take questions at the end, but if you have a question during the presentation, feel free to type it in. I'll be collecting the questions, and at the end of the presentation, I'll be reading out the questions, and then we can have Julie answer them or field them to our other distinguished panelists. So let me do a quick introduction of our main presenter, Julie Manley, and then we'll get on with the webinar. So Julie Manley is president of Guiding Green, LLC, which is a sustainability consulting firm. Julie develops and manages industrial collaborations for the American Chemical Society's Green Chemistry Institute. These collaborations have over 40 companies working non-competitively to advance green chemistry and green engineering in the chemical industry. Prior to forming Guiding Green, Julie worked for 10 years at Abbott Labs in manufacturing and environmental health and safety. Julie has a Master of Public Health from Michigan, University of Michigan, and is a certified Six Sigma Green Belt and certified hazardous materials manager. So Julie, please take it away, and thanks so much for being here.
All right, well, thank you. Thank you, Monica, Sarah, and the GC3 for the invitation to share the grant program with you. I coordinate, as mentioned, and administer the roundtables and the grant process on behalf of the Green Chemistry Institute. And really the question of the success or value of the program is really best answered by the researchers or those implementing the research. So while I will be happy to share with you aspects of the program and history of the program and what I think are the values of the program, I think it's really best shared by those that are doing it. So that I don't have to look at my picture on the webinar anymore, I'm going to put other pictures up. So I'd like to introduce the additional panelists that we have on the phone today. Mike Kopak is Principal Research Scientist at Eli Lilly and Company, which is a member of the Pharmaceutical Roundtable, and as well he was a co-chair of the Roundtable for several years. He's also been a project lead on many of our grants. Dan Richter is a Principal Scientist and Green Chemistry Lead at Pfizer in La Jolla, California, so he's staying a lot warmer than I am in the middle of Michigan right now. And he has also been a project lead for our medicinal chemistry program on the Roundtable, as well as some of the grants. Rob Malechka is Professor and Chair of the Department of Chemistry at Michigan State University. He's also a recipient of the Presidential Green Chemistry Challenge Award and has also worked with us on several grants, and he'll chime in when that time comes as well. Neil Garg is a recent grant recipient of the Roundtable, and he is a professor and vice chair for the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry at UCLA. Wei Zhang is professor and director of the Center for Green Chemistry at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. He'll also chime in on collaborations and various aspects of the grant program. And finally, I'm also happy to add that we can share the student perspective with respect to our grant program with Asha Kadam, who's on the phone. She's a PhD candidate working right now on writing her thesis and hopes to defend next semester. So thank you all very, very much. And I will continue to present, but you're welcome to chime in when you think appropriate or you want to add something. With respect to the additional panelists I added today, please don't read into it in terms of that all of our grants are US-based or something of that nature. We actually do have, all of our grant programs are actually international, but because of the time zone challenges, it's already 2 o'clock this afternoon Eastern, I didn't think it was fair to get somebody on the phone from Europe. So we do at least span the whole US for that matter. So thank you very much for your participation. So in terms of the objectives of this presentation, I was asked to demonstrate really how the Pharmaceutical Roundtable catalyzes green chemistry innovation through our research grant program. So this is actually while we've presented numerous times in various settings on the Pharmaceutical Roundtables, and it's actually been around for the past 8 years, this is actually the first presentation focused solely on the grant program. So by doing that, I will actually start with a little bit of background on the Pharmaceutical Roundtable, where it came from, and how its projects relate to the grants. And then I'll focus largely and solely on the grant program, and we'll talk about the accomplishments as well as things that we've learned through the process. And again, the emphasis on this is really sharing the experience from the shareholder perspective, because again, I can share with you the programmatic aspects, but I think the real value out of and understanding about how much green chemistry innovation has really been catalyzed by this program is really by those that are either doing the research or those that are applying the research. So like I said, everybody, panelists, feel free to jump in. So I'm going to start with a little bit of background. The American Chemical Society is actually the world's largest society for chemical professionals, with individual memberships more than 163,000 people as members. The Green Chemistry Institute is a component of the ACS, with its mission to catalyze and enable the implementation of green chemistry and engineering throughout the chemical enterprise. I'm really going to stay high level here, only so that we have an opportunity to focus on the grant program. But in order to show how these roundtables fit into the Green Chemistry Institute, I did want to give you a little bit of an overview. So the Green Chemistry Institute largely focuses on science, education, and industry. And my role, contracted through the Green Chemistry Institute, has been to really focus on their industrial component and developing collaborations to enhance and catalyze the implementation of green chemistry in various sectors. So on the right-hand side, I have this circular picture, or diagram, if you will, that is really, it's not an actual depiction of any of the collaborations. However, the intent of the collaborations is that by focusing on any given sector, and the roundtables or industrial partnerships, which they also call roundtables, really focus on very specific sectors of the chemical enterprise. And in turn, by focusing on any one sector's needs, the idea is that ultimately the various sectors can work together through the supply chain to implement green chemistry throughout the chemical enterprise. So as I mentioned, this is not a depiction of the roundtables per se. In fact, the roundtables that exist today are the Pharmaceutical Roundtable, the Formulated Consumer Products Roundtable, and the Chemical Manufacturers Roundtable. So as you can tell, the idea is that they do span different aspects of the chemical enterprise, with the focus that, with the hope that as we continue to develop roundtables, we can ultimately affect the entire supply chain. There is actually a fourth roundtable in development, and that one is focused on hydraulic fracturing. So that's actually the areas of the roundtables. The roundtables actually work on a premise of co-opetition, and I'm not sure if anybody's really utilized this word all that frequently, but it's really based on, described by companies that work in the same market collaboratively. So all of these roundtables are collaborative. They explore new ideas to advance scientific knowledge and research new products. They simultaneously compete for market share and exploit the new knowledge in different ways. So in essence, comparing it to a football analogy, it's like discussing the fundamentals of football, so running, blocking, passing, whatever it may be, something that is critical to how you play football, but everybody does it. But no one, obviously, would ever discuss what goes on inside the 20 or the red zone, because that's where you win or lose the game. And so similarly in the case of these roundtables, that's, nobody's actually talking about marketing or profit or any of that nature, because that's where the money's made. What we're really focusing on non-competitive challenges that are really the fundamentals of how the industry works, or everything that we do is non-competitive. So since we do have Rob Malechka on the phone, and I know he's a Michigan State professor, I just kind of thought I'd throw a little analogy in there that, for example, if we're going to use the football analogy for a second, I am just sure guessing that Ohio State would have loved to see the Michigan State playbook inside the 20, at least was it last weekend at the Big Ten Championship, because then they wouldn't have dropped from number 2 in the country and everything else. But again, that stuff's not shared. So in the case of the roundtables, everything is non-competitive. And the reason I emphasize that is when you talk about a grant program and being non-competitive, that obviously has to infiltrate through the grant program and will affect how we do things. So I'll share that as we go. From a foundation of the roundtable, there's several components. One, I just talked about non-competitive. Again, everything we do, everything we work on is non-competitive. However, it's whatever we produce, companies have the opportunity to implement how they see fit for a competitive advantage. We do not in any way dictate how they utilize the information, but everything we do fundamentally is non-competitive. Everything is also, the roundtables are also member-governed, which means that the roundtables are really setting the strategy and the projects they want to work on, even in this case, the grants and the research areas that they want to focus on. So I administer the program, I manage it, and really facilitate it, but the entire efforts are really dictated by the members themselves. Everything tends to be consensus-driven for the most part. There are very few cases where we have a voting process, but in fact, there are times. But for the most part, we do focus on consensus, meaning that we don't want to hinder progress, and we keep moving forward. And finally, As you can imagine, when companies are paying in to be part of an organization, everything has to be value-oriented. So the Roundtable really focuses on providing a return on investment to its members, and the grant program for the Pharmaceutical Roundtable specifically does contribute to that value proposition. So moving on to the Pharmaceutical Roundtable, I'd just like to give you a quick idea of what the membership currently looks like. We have 15 member companies in addition to the Green Chemistry Institute. They are comprised of pharmaceutical or companies that make pharmaceuticals, as well as contract research and manufacturing organizations. So this is a snapshot in time. I know it's today, but there is no limitation to this membership. So in the sense that if a company meets the membership scope, they can certainly join the organization. Specifically, the Pharmaceutical Roundtable mission is to catalyze the implementation of green chemistry and engineering in the pharmaceutical industry globally. They developed this mission back in 2005, and it still holds true today. And they also developed, and when I say they, again, it's member-run, so they really decided what the mission and the strategic priorities are. And they defined 4 strategic priorities. And I'm not going to go into each one specifically, but I'll give you a little bit of heads up of kind of what fits within each area. First and foremost, the area we'll be focusing largely on today is informing and influencing the research agenda. Really, how do we, as a industry, develop greener pharmaceuticals in such a way, how do we ultimately develop greener pharmaceuticals and informing and influencing the research agenda, really looking at the fundamental chemical reactions that are utilized in the industry, and ultimately greening those will provide and enable the industry to have a greener profile and more sustainable profile. Educating leaders looks at not just current scientists in our industry, but also future scientists. So when we speak to Asha later in the conversation, our research grant is very important from that perspective as well. So it does have an education component. So in educating leaders, we do a variety of lectures to the various sites, workshops, training workshops, as well as various publications that come out to really educate current scientists within the companies, as well as those currently in education, in an educational program somewhere. We also look at developing tools for innovation. What that really focuses on is a variety of tools that will enable scientists to be able to make more informed decisions at the bench when they're developing that next process. So common tool that we've developed is a solvent selection guide, reagent selection guides, process mass intensity calculators, a variety of tools that will help scientists design greener processes. And then finally, one of our strategic priorities was to collaborate globally. As an American Chemical Society-based organization, there was a concern in the early days that we wouldn't be global. But in fact, the industry is global, and we as an organization need to be global. So in order to assure that we always focused on global collaboration, it became a strategic priority. And everything I can truly tell you today is global in nature. So when we look at, I mentioned earlier that value and return on investment are incredibly important when you look at, or participating in an organization that requires funding. So one of our member companies actually created this slide and showed us actually the value that they get from the Roundtable. And I'm not going to go into it, and it has a lot of detail on it, but really the various strategic priorities have a number of projects associated with them at any given time. But what I wanted to highlight to you was the research grant, which is top left table. All the companies put in a certain amount of contribute on average between $10,000 and $25,000 a year to participate in the organization. And over a 3-year period, they actually estimate a return on their investment of $825,000. So it's a substantial return on their investment, which is great, but more importantly, the research grant is roughly half of that return on investment. So that's something that we value quite highly, and we really need to emphasize assuring that the value obtained from the research grant is something that the members actually will keep in high regard and provide value, and ultimately design, can help scientists design greener processes. So that's the only reason I show you that slide today. So going back, now that you have an overview of the roundtable a little bit and kind of the areas in which we work, when we look at the strategic priorities, where we typically put the research grant is in the area of informing and influencing the research agenda. And it's important to note, I did highlight the words a little bit differently. Informing and influencing are in fact really two different steps. And in order to get to the grant process, there was definitely an understanding what our needs were in the first place. So we'll get to those needs in just a moment. But when I look at these strategic priorities, I should also mention that the grant program really touches on all of these aspects of all of these priorities at any given time. So that's important to us as well, because it obviously demonstrates further value back to the organization. So back in 2005 and 2006, in the very early days of the Roundtable, it was really important to say, what is it that the Roundtable or the industry as a whole finds that are needed, what's needed to develop greener processes. And one of the first things they did was to develop, or I should say brainstorm, the key green chemistry research areas. These are research reactions that are very, very commonly used throughout the industry, and they're in need of greener alternatives. So the intent was to really, hopefully, focus some attention to these areas to get additional research done to ultimately drive the development of greener processes. I'm not going to get into how these were developed. There's a reference on the bottom right that does explain the process for which these were actually prioritized. In 2011, we came out with the key green engineering research areas, again, developed through a brainstorming and voting related process, but the paper noted at the bottom of the page can also share with you how the process was developed and how those were prioritized. Ultimately, we utilize both the key green engineering and the key green chemistry research areas to, ultimately those are used as the scope of research grants in the future. So when the Roundtable looked to influence the research agenda, so we moved from the informing now to the influencing, they really recognized that there's two ways to do it. So as I mentioned, companies put in a certain amount of money into the Roundtable, so certainly we had the opportunity to directly influence the research agenda by really putting our money where our mouth was, by saying, hey, not only do we want to say what these key green chemistry areas are, but we want to fund them directly. So that's what we'll spend a majority of the time this afternoon talking about. And the other aspect was we also had the opportunity to influence others, meaning influence people that had a lot more money than us. So in particular, the National Science Foundation, as well as the National Institutes of Health, certainly have a budget well outstanding of what the Roundtable does. So the National Science Foundation, we realized, had a grant program called Grant Opportunities for Academic Liaison with Industry. We decided, after having worked with Rob Malechka on another grant, that we would approach him to see if we could work on a collaboration with his colleague Mitch Smith and the Roundtable on a grant for the NSF. So what this was, Grant Opportunities for Academic Liaison with Industry, if people are not aware, is a collaboration between a for-profit institution as well as an academic institution. So being that I may have mentioned that the American Chemical Society's Green Chemistry Institute is not for profit, but the Roundtable is in fact representative of industry, we as an entity, the Roundtable, could not be the for-profit entity. However, we asked one of our members to step forward, and in this case Merck did, to be the co-PI, to essentially represent the industrial component of the grant, but to certainly act on behalf of the roundtable as a whole. So happy to say that Rob was able to get that, and his colleague were able to get that grant a couple years ago. It's now in its final year. And I guess, Rob, do you have anything you'd like to share with respect to that grant type? Rob, do you happen to be on mute?
Hello?
Hi there.
Hello.
Are you ready? No, I can hear you now. Are you good?
Okay. Yeah, I haven't touched anything here. Okay. So yeah. So thanks, Julie. For us, this has been really an excellent opportunity that was really initiated by the Roundtable. The grant is, as Julie said, with Merck, and where this has really been just a superb opportunity is we've had students. Well, we had a postdoc there for 3 months, and we've had students there for a year at a time in Rahway doing their dissertation work, but doing it at Merck where they have access to that physical infrastructure, but just importantly the intellectual infrastructure that takes place there. And it really was a true collaboration. We had weekly conference calls to discuss exactly what the students there should be doing. Of course, we also had students here at MSU doing some of the work as well. Again, I think it's been a great experience for the students, but also it's allowed us to go in different directions as academic researchers that we might not have gone in otherwise. We have been publishing. We've been able to present. We actually won a Merck award for the collaboration. And so it really has been fantastic from that standpoint. The other thing I'll point to is that if you look at the 2 awards on the slide, not surprisingly, the NSF award is less, but that was actually augmented a little bit by both the Roundtable and by Merck themselves. So that actually helped to really stretch the dollar. And then finally, because we would have meetings back and forth, we were able to actually introduce more of our students and colleagues to Merck scientists, and then we were able to bring students there for short meetings as well. So it's been a great collaboration. It's like anything else. Looking back, I think we'd like to do things a little bit differently to actually involve the Roundtable more broadly, but hopefully there'll be another one.
I'm sure we wouldn't mind. Using somebody else's money is always a way to go.
Right, yeah.
So thanks, Rob.
Sure.
I should also mention that we have also helped influence NIH funding with respect to the challenge grants that they gave back in 2000. I'm not even going to guess the year off the top of my head. But so Shannon Stahl at the University of Wisconsin-Madison won a research grant for about $750,000 for a 3-year period of time. The interesting thing about the NIH Challenge Grant and how we were able to influence it as a roundtable is that just prior to the announcement of the request for proposals for those grants, those challenge grants, the roundtable had recently met with NIH, in particular NIGMS, the Institute for General Medical Sciences, and encouraged them, explain green chemistry and its importance, and encouraged them to fund work in this area. And they did understand that, and so when the opportunity presented itself to create challenge grants, no joke, I got a call that said, hey, you know, what kind of language should we use in this grant? And the language that we worked with NIH is exactly the language that ended up in the RFP and ultimately was awarded to Shannon Stahl. So we're really happy about that because it was really directed towards exactly the research that we were after. And in particular, what was I going to say on that one? I guess, for anyway, that's enough on the NIH grants themselves, but really something quite valuable and influencing others are things that, while we haven't necessarily pursued on a regular basis, it's something that certainly their dollars can go a lot further than our grants, as you'll see. So the grant program that the Pharmaceutical Roundtable started back in 2007 is now in its 7th year. We've awarded a number of grants, as you can see. In fact, the goalie grant is actually on our list as well, so you can see that as well. And ultimately, these fund a variety of different research areas. We have really varied our scope, as I'll talk about in a moment, in terms of what we've funded and where we've funded. But these are international grants, and as you can tell, they have really spanned actually the scope from across the U.S. to across the world. And in terms of proposals, in fact, we have proposals coming in literally around the world. And we're not choosing based on geographic area in any way. It's really simply based on what's the best proposal for the given research scope. So Rob, I saw you had a question. Do you want to wait until the IP part?
Yeah.
Okay. So various aspects of the grant program, I thought it was worth diving into them a little bit more and talking about what we've learned and how we've adjusted over time a little bit. So the first thing would be that our actual grant program was established when we had a roundtable member who had been in academia. So while you would think that the roundtable is largely made up of industry, which it is, having that expertise of somebody that had been in academia really helped us develop a program and understand how to develop a program, because otherwise, yes, we have ACS has expertise in grants, and we certainly took that and learned from that as well. But to have a member understand and tell us, what time periods of the year are important, or how long we need to put out a request for proposals, all those things we really learned from that individual. So when prioritizing the research and defining the scope, as I mentioned, we already based those largely on the green chemistry and green engineering research areas. In the early years, we just put out the green chemistry and green chemistry research areas, and were open to any proposal that met one or more of those research areas. Over time, we've narrowed the focus and selected only a couple of those research areas, or even more specifically now, we tend to be much more specific into sub areas of those. So it really depends on, how much, not just the amount of money, but really about how much focus do you want to provide to the researchers, so that when you get the proposals in, you can really compare, apples to apples, and where you think you get the opportunity for impact. Eligibility, all of our grants are open to academic institutions worldwide. The reason for that is because there is a direct relationship to the educational component of our strategic priorities. In the case, we get a lot of questions of, we understand that research is being done elsewhere in government and small, small companies across the world, but in this case, because we have an academic focus as well, we focus on academic institutions worldwide. With respect to the proposal process, again, that has changed over time as well. We used to ask for something like, as I recall, I think it was like a 15-page full proposal in the early years. And we not only realized that it's difficult for an academic to write those, it's also really difficult to get our reviewers, and our reviewers are the scientists at our respective companies, to review 20+ 15-page documents. So what we've actually changed things, and so we developed over time. We even went to a 2-phase proposal process depending on the grant, which would actually be a pre-proposal phase, a short pre-proposal phase followed by selected people to go on to the full proposal. Nowadays, we've evolved to now shorter proposals and only one proposal process, meaning there is no 2-phase process. So it's something we could revisit. I don't know if there's necessarily a lot that we've learned in the process, except for the fact I can tell you we do keep our proposal number of pages in our proposals down to closer to say 5 to 7 now. I think that works for, my guess is it seems to be working for the academic institution, but it's also working for the reviewers. Proposal requirements, my only recommendation there and what we learned over time is to be very specific about what you're looking for in the proposal. So when you get the various proposals on the various topics, you can compare on the merits of the research and not that somebody didn't put in a budget or whatever it may be. We also require that the submissions be done through an authorized office of the university, and if there isn't one that, internationally they may not have such an office, but a director or somebody at a chair of a department needs to sign off that they've, essentially what we're looking for is that they've approved and read the requirements of the grant, meaning any kind of IP requirements have at least been scanned through and that they agree to them in the terms of the grant. And finally, we do have a review process, and our scientists at the member companies have an opportunity to participate in that. All of that is blinded, so I should say that so that the academic institution has no idea of who the reviewers are, and that gives the reviewers a comfort level that they can adequately review a process or a proposal without being concerned of a personal, relationship or otherwise. Mike, I know you've been involved in these a lot over the years. Any thoughts on the review process or the other aspects of the grant program? If you're on mute, you might need to take it off. All right, Dan, I'll open it to you as well if you have any comments on the...
Julie, can you hear me?
Yep, I can.
Okay, this is Mike. Sorry, for some reason I was temporarily muted. I think you kind of hit it spot on. I mean, there's been the grant process has evolved over time. I think to where we've kind of taken a lessons learned, where it's been streamlined and improved. That it's now should be easier for both people, academics or whoever is submitting a grant application, easier for them, but also, as you mentioned, easier on the review process. One comment I will make is that over time, the grant process more recently has evolved into a very highly collaborative process where the academic researchers who get awarded the grants will, in fact, in a lot of cases, be interacting directly with companies in the pharmaceutical industry, which are on the Pharma Roundtable. We did this recently with the research grant that was awarded to Weizhang and some others, and they were very highly successful. And so I think we'll probably see that trend continue in the future.
Great, thanks, Mike. So if I can advance the slide, I'll try. Okay, so, oops, I've passed the most important slide, I think. There we go. I mentioned that the roundtables are all non-competitive in nature, so with that, it's really critical that there is no IP associated with these grants. And if there is IP, that it's all open to the public. So our request for proposals requires any listing of existing background intellectual property that might limit the freedom to operate the research coming out of this grant. It also very clearly identifies that the primary purpose is to publish research to make the information publicly available, and any patent that results from the research shall be immediately dedicated to the public royalty-free. We recognize that this requirement is critically important to us, but it also may limit the number of people that apply for the grant. We recognize that as just a risk that we take. Rob, did you have something to add here?
I think the one thing that this policy is just incredibly liberating, and it's not as easy to get through the academic administration as it is, as I would have thought, but they hated it here at MSU. The fact that basically we were giving away the farm in their eyes. But for us, this was just absolutely the way to go. We have another collaboration with another company that's outside the Roundtable where there are IP considerations, and it just slows things down. And so I think this is just absolutely the way to go on these sorts of collaborations.
Great comment. Thank you. You never know with that. You know, it takes the right professor, right researcher to agree to that as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously everyone's going to be a little bit different, but for us, the hardest part of actually getting this grant approved was reminding both MSU and Merck, to be honest, that there is no IP here.
Exactly. So as we go forward, we definitely learned and adjusted as we moved, as Mike mentioned as well. Our funding amounts have changed anywhere from as high as 160 or 100, I think 160 might have been our high, $160,000, all the way down to $25,000. And it really depends on the project scope, the money we had available at the time, or also a component of the economy we realize also plays a factor. So if we usually have grants that have a range and time period, meaning 1 to 2 years, depending on how the professor or how the researcher wants to allocate the funds. And we've realized over time that money goes a whole lot, or I shouldn't say a whole lot further, but 2 years of a postdoc in the U.S. is generally equivalent to 1 year of a postdoc in the European Union. So there are certain, budget factors that come into play. Also, we have changed our reporting structures a little bit over time just to make it easy. All of our reports are accessible to the members. We get reports every 6 months when there's an active research grant, and those go to our members versus just the publication is available publicly. And so we've tried to streamline those to make it easier for companies to access the information that they may be looking for. And finally, as Mike mentioned, the level of collaboration has really changed over the years. And it still will evolve depending on the subject matter, I'm sure, but it really takes the right researcher to be interested in collaborating not only with industry, but collaborating on as routinely as some of our projects are. So some of our projects actually look for monthly reports from the researcher. So Wei, I know you've been involved in a very active collaboration. Any thoughts to add?
Yes, thank you, Julie, to invite me to participate in the webinar. Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay,
great. Yeah, as you know, I'm from UMass Boston. We have a long tradition of green chemistry. Last year, we celebrated a 10th year green chemistry program, which started by John Warner. So over the years, we have a lot of activities through Julie, through Berkeley Q. She was former chair of ACS Green Chemistry Institute governing board. So our group received a grant, which is 2011. It's a new development. We got a lot of interesting results by collaboration with industry scientists like Mike and other members. So this is not just a grant, it's a collaboration. We learn a lot. And with our student, Asha, involved project, he's going to comment on this project later. So we get a small but very interesting project study alternative solvent for green region. So this work has been published early this year, and it's selected as a hot paper and already get attention from Aldrich and other companies. They probably going to develop a greener solvent for green region. So I'm looking forward for more this kind of collaboration through grant or conference or other education training program. Thank you.
Thanks, Wei. I appreciate that. And so finally, I'm going to, kind of push the end here and really focus on the accomplishments. Certainly, there's certain papers and different things that have come out of this, and I can't even estimate them at this time in terms of how many had an affiliation with the Roundtable grant program. But I think what's important, most important, is to hear from those on the phone and how the research has affected them or how they've been able to implement it. So, Dan, what's the grant program meant to you guys at Pfizer or your experience?
Hi, Julie. Thank you. It's been very exciting for me, I guess, in terms of the fact that, you know, this is kind of a new thing for me to, you know, get experience with. But it's been really great because it's nice to influence, like you said, what we're getting out of the academic realm. Oftentimes, you know, you're looking at a reference for some chemistry you want to do, but it doesn't really have the sort of pharmaceutically relevant substrates that you'd like to see and see how those work, and oftentimes there's a lot of adjustments that need to happen. So in the case of the grant that I was involved with Professor Garg, it was really nice to be able to influence that and to be able to, you know, give them the insight of, you know, we like your chemistry, but we would like it modified to be more useful to us, which, you know, Neil, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's kind of like, who would want to be doing research not going to be used either, you know? So it's kind of, I think it works well both ways, and working with Neil has been really great.
Perfect segue, Neil.
All right, am I coming through okay on the audio?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Yeah, hey everybody. This has been an awesome collaboration. I think, just to comment on some of the things Dan mentioned, that interaction about substrates and, in our case, also what solvents are most useful to industry, that was really critical for us. Oftentimes in the academic world, we're just moving ahead, trying to publish the next JAX paper, right? And we might be able to publish a JAX paper, and then this chemistry may never be used. That insight into which substrates are especially useful to look at, which sorts of solvents would be especially attractive from a green chemistry perspective, all that insight was provided by Dan and the field members of the GCI, and that really paved the way for the research we did. And so I think that, Dan, I certainly won't correct you. I absolutely agree that was a really fun and important aspect of this collaboration that just comes out of this grant opportunity.
Excellent. Thank you. And then finally, Asha, your thoughts from a student perspective?
Yeah, hi Julie. I would like first to thank Professor Zhang to assign me the green chemistry project. It has definitely helped me to broaden my horizon of experience, where I learned a lot about important aspects of green chemistry inside academia and also outside the academia. I would like to mention that through this project, I got opportunity to interact with an extremely talented group of individuals, the members of GCI Roundtable, from industries such as Mike from Eli Lilly, Paul from Pfizer, and Fabrice from Novartis. I thank for their constant support and feedback from the beginning till end of the project, which helped me or us to investigate and obtain significant data. In short, I call it as good internship for students to work on key research areas of industrial chemistry. Again, it was a pleasure to be involved in this collaboration, which resulted into a good, meaningful publication. Julie, special thanks to you. Efficiently coordinate all the meetings and especially my travel to Green Chemistry Conference. Thank you.
Well, you're very welcome. And I guess you just mentioned something too. The Roundtable tries to give away certain registrations to conferences for students, and we typically pull from a pool of our students that have been involved in the research grants as well. So we try to, as I mentioned, go through the value chain in terms of the impacts this grant can have. And I can't get to the next slide. Just heads up, in 2014, we do expect to award 2 additional grants early next year, as well as anticipate 2 requests for proposals in, say, the first half of the year as well. So in closing, we just want to thank the Green Chemistry Institute, the Pharmaceutical Roundtable specifically, all of the member companies and grant recipients, although certainly they couldn't all be on the call today, especially all of you, Mike, Dan, Rob, Neil, Wei, and Asha. I really appreciate your time. And really, in closing, whatever we accomplish really belongs to our entire group, a tribute to our combined effort. and that came from Walt Disney. So Monica, I'll give it back to you.
Great, thank you, Julie, so much. Thank you and your colleagues for a tremendous presentation. It was fascinating to learn about the research grant program. I really, honestly didn't know too much about it going into it, and it's really quite an eye-opening program. I really just want to commend all of you for working so hard to create such a fantastic program, not only to develop industrially relevant research, as you mentioned, but to help educate the workforce of future green chemists that we need if we're going to achieve our goals of advancing green chemistry. So congratulations to all of you for such a fantastic program and for being here today to talk about it. I want to remind folks that if you go to the control panel on top and click on the right down arrow and click on Q&A, you can put in some questions and we'll be reading those off. I'd like to, as the moderator, take the liberty of starting off the Q&A process. Julie, is it correct that of all the roundtables that GCI has, this is the only grant program within a roundtable, industrial roundtable program? Is that true?
That is currently the case, yes.
That is the case. Okay, I thought so. And I'm curious about why that is. Do you think that there is something unique about the pharma sector that lends itself to this type of pre-competitive, collaborative research program, or is it kind of an artifact of, you know, folks that have been involved in the pharma roundtable? What do you think is it about the pharma sector that lends itself well to this program, and could it be adopted in other industrial sectors as well? Is it a good model for other sectors?
So it definitely could be implemented by other sectors. I think the biggest contributing reason as to why it's not implemented in the other roundtables is financial. The Pharmaceutical Roundtable contributes sufficient funds to be able to do these types of grants, like $150,000 on an annual basis. The other roundtables don't have that level of contribution. So what they are actually looking at is more along the lines of a goalie grant or, you know, some other way to influence others for their research needs. Okay, all right, and others chime in if you'd like to add to the conversation. But that's an interesting aspect to this. And I have one other question, and then we have a few that are in the Q&A box. Regarding the pre-competitive aspect of the program, you call it non-competitive, I think of it as pre-competitive. Do you find that there are bright lines between what is considered pre-competitive or non-competitive and what is considered competitive? So when you get together to talk about specific areas of technical research, do you tend to debate the question of whether this is pre-competitive or not, or is it pretty clear? You know, we've actually never run into the problem of something, whether or not it becomes a competitive issue or not. Everything has so far been in very clearly in the non-competitive range, in the respect that every company is working on and, you know, utilizes these common reactions to develop their pharmaceuticals. So I think maybe having those key green chemistry research areas defined early does help shape that. But guys, Dan or Mike, any comments on that?
It's Dan. Hey, I mean, when we did the grant with Professor Garg in the MedChem team, we just sort of discussed, you know, what sorts of things. It's almost like, you know, a commonality of problem. You know, we have like transformations that we're all doing. We're not going to tell each other what the substrates are, but, you know, for any type of reaction, it's like, well, this one we use quite a bit, and we would like to see something that could be done better or whatever. And it's almost, you know, kind of like the football analogy. You know, it's kind of like, you know, we all play football, but what do you guys think the best pair of shoes to be wearing on a turf field is? You know what I mean? so that we can all play better. And it's kind of something like that, you know. And a lot of ideas come out, and I think when we first started talking about a possibility of a grant, I think very quickly we came up with maybe 6 areas that, you know, the group of us thought would be good things to go after, and then we had to narrow that down to 1. But there was certainly no worry about any sort of a competitive nature with it.
I guess I should also just mention that ACS, we also confer with ACS Legal if there's any concerns regarding that as well.
Okay, okay, but it sounds like it hasn't been an issue. That's interesting. All right, so I have a request here where a participant is wondering if you could possibly walk through a specific case where research has led to an innovation that has been adopted and how the pre-competitive research led to that.
I'm not the scientist, but Mike or Dan, some of this research has been fairly relevant. Actually, you know what, Mike, maybe the Grignard research.
Yeah, that's I think a great example to comment on, because just real briefly, how that project originated was, I think it was back in 2009. It was a basically study was done of solvents used for organometallic reagents, and it was realized that there were a considerable amount of fairly non-green type solvents that were being used. And what would happen would be a scientist would purchase those organometallic reagents and those non-green solvents, and they'd persist through your entire process and perhaps have to be removed at a late date, or they'd stay with it. And so what we wanted to do was we wanted to influence suppliers to provide solvents or provide organometallic reagents and greener solvents. And so we created a grant, and Wei Zhang and Asha and his group did an excellent job of executing there, where they showed that methyl THF is a very, very versatile solvent for organometallic reagents, specifically Grignards. And so this work was presented at the Green Chemistry Engineering Conference a couple years ago and got published in Green Chemistry. And what it's done is the impact is, as Wei Zhang mentioned, suppliers have taken notice of this now, and major suppliers such as Aldrich Alpha Acer have moved methyl THF into some primary primary product lines for organometallics. So yeah, that's an example exactly what we wanted to do. We'd like to see greener solvents being used as early as possible in development. And that type of project really helped in that initiative, that effort.
That's a great example. Do you tend to write these up and publish them anywhere? It'd be interesting to learn more about these.
You're talking about the final output?
Well, yeah, just sort of a description of how the research grant program kind of played into this and so forth. Just, in some sense, the process of how this came about and the technical details. There's a little bit of that written up in the background of the Green Chemistry paper that published back in I believe it was back in April this year. We don't go into a great deal of that, but we do describe a little bit the background of the grant initiation and so forth in that publication. Great. Okay. Thank you. Any other examples that folks want to bring up? We have one more question on a different topic, but I thought I'd see if there's anything else.
I guess only other comment would be something, while it didn't go back into, I don't know, Neil, your grant, for example, just completed its work just a month or so ago. So I don't know yet if it's truly being implemented yet in industry. Perhaps Dan could give us a bit of guidance on its likely applicability. But the fact is also that we just gave Neil Garg an extension of the grant to be able to convert the research into an undergraduate lab experiment. So even if, while we do have hopes that it will be implemented in industry as well, but the fact is it'll also be enabling education of the next generation of scientists. Neil or Dan, do you have any comments on that research?
Yeah, I can comment a little bit. One, regarding the chemistry and how much it's being used in industry, I think the key challenge there, just for some background, this is nickel catalyzed couplings as opposed to the more common palladium catalyzed couplings. The biggest barrier there is the shift in people thinking about using nickel. And so I think what that grant helped us do is add the green chemistry aspect and the heterocycloscope that makes that chemistry, I think, much more attractive. So I know plenty of companies try this chemistry, and how far this widespread use goes, I don't really know. But I personally think it'll become increasingly more useful as time goes on. The other thing you mentioned about adopting this into the undergraduate lab, I mean, the premise is, I think, a really simple one and hopefully an effective one, and that's that if we really want to make an impact on green chemistry, let's have undergraduates performing green chemistry type experiments in the lab. So we're just implementing this now, actually, and we put it into a very small class about a week ago, and we'll put it hopefully in a larger class next year. And the hope then was that we'll publish something in Journal of Chemical Education on this green chemistry experiment. And I think the impact of that it would be I hope that one will be perhaps even higher than the use of the chemistry in industry, but I think both are very valuable.
Excellent. And I think if you have time, Rob Malechka has a comment as well.
Yeah, just real quick. I mean, I know that with the chemistry that we've been developing courtesy of the Goalie grant, that at least a couple of companies have set up groups that are using that chemistry. Again, it's sort of, I think, the analogous to the shoes that football shoes that we're developing the methods that we know that they're being used in separate groups on their specific substrates. So we know that's happening.
That's what we want to hear.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a couple things. The work that Neil did, it's good because just like he said, nickel hasn't been as prominent as sort of like palladium and stuff like that for a lot of coupling reactions, and I think just getting that work done and out there in just greener solvents, like Mike said, to start that earlier in the process, I think there's definitely a higher interest here in switching over to things that are a little less costly than palladium for these types of reactions. So the nickel is definitely being looked at more extensively. And the other thing is, we've actually hired a few folks in the last year, and it's interesting to talk to them about green chemistry, and they have this kind of deer in headlights look on their face of, what are you talking about? So, being able to convert that to an undergraduate lab and have folks, at least get some exposure to this before they get out into industry is actually a very, very impactful thing.
Mm-hmm. It's great to hear the tie into education. That's fantastic. So kudos to all of you for that. We need that. Well, we're 3 minutes after the top of the hour, so unfortunately I feel like we can continue on with this discussion and can continue to be quite interesting, but we'll need to wrap up. And Julie, if you could advance to the next slide, we're going to do a little bit of a promo at the very end. I want to thank all of you, all of our panelists, for taking the time to prepare. Julie, thanks for pulling this wonderful group together. It really was quite an eye-opener, very interesting presentation on this great ACS GCI research grant program, and just to hear about what all of you are doing in your own organization. So thanks so much. And again, if you're interested in hearing some of the webinars that we've had previously as part of the series, check the GC3 webpage, or let me know if you can't get access to those and I can help you with that. And I want to let everybody know that our annual conference is scheduled. The GC3 annual Roundtable conference is scheduled from May 28th to May 30th. It'll be at 3M's Innovation Center in St. Paul, Minnesota, and they'll be hosting the meeting. If you haven't been to a GC3 Roundtable, I can guarantee you won't regret it if you try to make it this year. It's a fascinating 2.5-day meeting of wonderful people with great enthusiasm for green chemistry, exchanging great ideas. So thanks again to our panelists. Mark your calendars for the roundtable, and we look forward to having you on future webinars. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.